Hello everyone, this is Sears Trivia. Welcome back to another episode of our Let's Talk Lore series. We will be doing the part 1 historical episode for the ChiBi Trilogy. Now, as you all know, our lore series are based on the Luo Guanzhong's Three Kingdoms novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So it's a work of historical fiction. So a lot of the story here has a lot of folklore elements and Chinese opera elements that kind of made the story more exciting and less historically accurate. So let's go over what really happened in history. And our lore series started off with Xu Shu. Now, Xu Shu was Liu Bei's first strategist. A lot of his actual life story of him being a youxia at a young age, murdering someone for revenge, and getting into trouble, moving to the Jin province. We talked about all of that in our lore series, and those are all factual. And he did work for Liu Bei as his first real military strategist. And more importantly, he did suggest to Liu Bei to recruit Zhuge Liang. And he told Liu Bei that Zhuge Liang is a very talented young man and someone you really want to have on your side moving forward if you want to make something of yourself. And he did suggest to Liu Bei that because Zhuge Liang has been living sort of a hermit lifestyle and has been avoiding getting recruited, the best way to recruit him is to travel to Zhuge Liang's home. Going to his home would show him that you really sincerely want to bring him out to recruit him. So Liu Bei listened to Xu Shu and recruited Zhuge Liang. And unlike what we talked about in the lore series where we said Xu Shu had to leave Liu Bei because Cao Cao kidnapped his mom, that wasn't actually the case. Xu Shu and Zhuge Liang actually worked together with Liu Bei for a time when they were at Xinye. Xu Shu eventually did leave Liu Bei because of his mom, but that happens somewhere down the line. So with Xu Shu and Zhuge Liang both working for Liu Bei, they fought Cao Cao's army when Cao Cao invaded personally. And during the Battle of Changban-Po, where Zhao Yun was in charge of guarding the family, like we talked about in the lore series, that was when Xu Shu's mom was captured. Xu Shu's mom was living with Liu Bei, Zhuge Liang, and Xu Shu the whole time. But when they were escaping from Cao Cao's force, during the battle where all the family members got scattered, Cao Cao's forces were able to capture Xu Shu's mom. And from that point on, Xu Shu left and joined Cao Cao to take care of his mom. So that part of the story was factual, but was kind of mixed in to a different time period to highlight Zhuge Liang in the book. So speaking of Zhuge Liang, let's talk a little bit about this almost mythical figure in Chinese history. So Zhuge Liang is, as we all know, was nicknamed the Sleeping Dragon. He had a huge impact on the kingdom of Shu. So let's look at what part of his story is factual and what part is more of a legend. So first, as we said before, Liu Bei had to visit him at his house in order to hire him. Whether or not he went 3 times is hard to say. Most likely not, but Liu Bei's 3 visit is just very, very famous till today. So it's kind of accepted that that happened. But like I said earlier, Xu Shu was with Liu Bei during the time, and Xu Shu was a personal friend to Zhuge Liang. So most likely they went together, and it probably didn't take them 3 visits. And when Liu Bei visited Zhuge Liang, what was most important and why I personally think Zhuge Liang is such a great figure, even if you take away a lot of mythical element, is that Zhuge Liang at age 27 or 26 at the time was able to present Liu Bei with a grand plan of how to create a third kingdom essentially during this time. Because if you follow Liu Bei's story so far, he's just been losing battle over battle, never having territory, been vassal to so many different characters of the time, Yuan Shu, Gong Sun Zan, now even with Liu Biao in Jinzhou. He really doesn't seem like the person that could possibly become a third kingdom. Cao Cao already controls all of the north and almost all of the central plains. That's clearly someone who you would say could possibly just unite China right away, right? He had the emperor kind of hostage in court, so he is like kind of the official figure. So him becoming an emperor is no doubt. And then you have Sun Quan, who resides in the south, He has the Yangtze River as a natural barrier defense, and his family has been managing the south for many generations, and the southern clans that are well known support his family's claim to that region. So them becoming a kingdom is not really in a doubt. So in that situation, Zhuge Liang was able to tell Liu Bei how he could build up his force in Jinzhou, which is kind of this centralized region that touches the north and the south, and then build an alliance with Sun Quan in order to hold off Cao Cao's forces, and then leverage the location of Jinzhou to launch an attack into the Yi province, which is what we call Shu today, to build a base of operation there. Because historically, the land of Shu has produced a lot of emperors in China. If you look at how the Han Dynasty started, the first emperor Liu Bang, Liu Bei's ancestor from many, many generations ago, was able to build his power from the Shu region. He was Han Zhongwang. That's why the Han Dynasty is named Han. If you look on the map in the game, Hanzhong, where Zhang Lu's territory is, near Ma Teng and Dongzhuo, that's where Liu Bang was located. And he was able to leverage the wealth, the food production from the Shu region to launch an attack to eventually unite all of China. And if you look farther down in history, Kingdom of Qin, during the Warring State, was also located in this region, and were able to leverage the wealth here to eventually unite China into the first kingdom, first dynasty of Chinese history. So Zhuge Liang's grand plan here is to have Liu Bei wiggle his way basically into Shu, take the land from Liu Zhang, and build up a base and seek out an opportunity to one day unite China. This vision is what makes Zhuge Liang great in my mind. Now, what else is true about Zhuge Liang? Well, he was the in-law to Liu Biao. He was married to Huang Yueying, and we kind of described that whole relationship dynamic there. So Zhuge Liang is kind of the figurehead later on once Liu Bei goes into Shu of the Jin province region of clans. But that's a story for another time. And one last thing that was factual was that Liu Qi, Liu Bao's firstborn son, who fell out of favor once Liu Bei remarried to Lady Cai, did admire Zhuge Liang a lot and seek a lot of advice from him to try to survive as he and his younger brother Liu Cong was in this battle for inheritance. And it was Zhuge Liang who gave him the idea that the best way for him to survive is to actually leave Liu Biao's side and get himself a military role as a garrison commander in Jiangxia. This way he has some men under his command, and that he doesn't have to stay in Xiangyang where he has to battle against Lady Cai and Cai Mao. Because, if he was not a military commander when Liu Bei died, what was most likely to happen is that Cai Mao and Lady Cai would probably just kill him in the capital of Jin province, and then push Liu Cong to become the rightful ruler, because they kind of held back the news of the funeral and all. But in the situation where Zhuge Liang gave him the plan, he was able to not be in the capital, have his own group of men, and survive that whole ordeal. Now, what is fiction about Zhuge Liang is what's going to disappoint a lot of you guys, because our story in the beginning, we talked about 2 battles where Zhuge Liang burned Cao Cao's forces down. There was a first wave of invasion at Bo, where he burned them in a field of reed and cattail. And then a second battle that I loved as a kid was when he enticed the forces of Cao Ren and Cao Hong to reside in the city of Xinye. And then he burned the whole city down as a big fire trap and kind of destroyed them. And both battles kind of highlighted Zhuge Liang's first dabble as a military commander, and kind of portrayed him as this ancient Sherlock Holmes that was able to predict all the moves of Cao Cao's forces. But sadly, all those are false. All those are fiction. Zhuge Liang wasn't actually hired to be a military commander. He actually didn't lead any men from a military strategist perspective until much later in the history of Three Kingdoms. In the beginning, he was a logistical officer. He was kind of in charge of managing the army and managing the food supplies and military supplies and making sure that the whole army can function smoothly. So he was kind of a planning figure, a political figure, but not a military figure. So none of the battles early on happened. And what else didn't happen is that when Liu Bei was doing his mass retreat, when Cao Cao's forces came by, he traveled with Liu Bei and with the main army. He didn't leave to seek help from Liu Qi. That part didn't happen. He was with Liu Bei the whole time. And speaking of Liu Bei's retreat, we can talk a little bit about Liu Bei's story as well. So Liu Bei's story that catches a lot of people's eyes, that I've seen a lot of you guys comment in the comment section below, that kind of didn't make sense, is that you saying, how could so many people want to follow Liu Bei to escape, given that the situation seems very dire? Like, wouldn't you want to stay at home? Cao Cao is just here to fight Liu Bei. It wouldn't actually impact your lifestyle. Well, there's 2 points here. One, since we talked about there was no fire burning Xinye, so the people that follow Liu Bei from Xinye was fictional. That part was not real. Liu Bei got a heads up when Cao Cao's army came. Liu Bei didn't know about Liu Bei's death. The part where Guan Yu captured an officer on patrol to find that out was actually factual. Song Zhong did exist. They found out from Song Zhong that Liu Bei is dead and Liu Cong has surrendered. And then they immediately left. They started marching out towards Xiangyang, like we said, and they were at the gate of Xiangyang. When people inside the city did open the gate, it wasn't just Wei Yan. A lot of people in the city opened the gate and wanted to get Liu Bei into the city to take over. Because if you think about it, you've been living, if you're a citizen of Jin province, or if you're an officer or a person at court who's been working in the Jin province for a long time, the stance of the Jin province has been sort of a neutral state. They acknowledge the emperor because, your Liu Bei is a distant relative to the emperor, and that Cao Cao is seen as someone who has taken advantage of the emperor and taken advantage of the Han, and is seen as this usurper prime minister. So no one likes him, and he's coming to attack us. And our old lord, who everyone loved, has died, but his treacherous second wife and her uncle, her brother, so the uncle of Liu Cong, Cai Mao, has just taken over everything, has buried the news of the old lord's death, wouldn't let the old lord's oldest son Liu Qi come to a funeral, buried him hastily, and the first thing they did was surrender to Cao Cao. This whole story paints a picture that no one's gonna like Lady Cai, no one's gonna like Cai Mao, no one's gonna like Liu Cong. So a lot of people in the court, a lot of people in the military opened the door of Xiangyang and wanted Liu Bei to come in to take the city. But Liu Bei didn't want to take the city from Liu Cong. So what happens, Liu Bei abandons the city and started leaving. And people started coming out of the city to follow Liu Bei. And that's why he had that whole huge crowd. And a lot of the refugees are civilians, but they're also relatives of the soldiers that Liu Bei had, right? Liu Bei has been in Xinye for 7 years at this point. So when they're escaping, let's say they have 10,000 men, right, in his army. Those 10,000 men have families. They're going to want to come with their husband when they're leaving. So let's say each family has 4 members. Then 10,000 men times 4, you have 40,000 refugees already. And then they arrive at Xinye. And then people, not Xinye, they arrive at Xiangyang. And then people from Xiangyang comes out to join them. And eventually build up to this 100,000 crowd, mostly civilians, leaving. And they were comfortable doing that because they didn't think they were ever threatened. Because the part of the story of, yes, Liu Bei is traveling very slowly with his group, but they had a huge head start. Cao Cao's army arrived 12 days after Liu Bei has already left Xinye, because there was no earlier battles, right? That part's fictional. They weren't like fighting the whole time and then Liu Bei uproots and leave. It's that Cao Cao is coming, Liu Bei finds out, Liu Bei leaves. So Liu Bei had like a 12-day head start to go to Xiangyang, and then a 2-day later, Cao Cao gets to Xiangyang and decides to catch Liu Bei. So he had a 2-week head start. So everyone thought even if they were slow, they could have beat Cao Cao's army to Jiangling. They could have beat Cao Cao's army to Jiangling. But Cao Cao really, really wanted Liu Bei's head. So what Cao Cao did is he sent out his cousin, Cao Chun. Cao Chun is Cao Ren's younger brother. And Cao Chun is famous for being the commander of the Tiger and Leopard Corps. So the Tiger and Leopard Cavalry Corps that Cao Cao is famous for and it's a unique unit of, the commander of that unit is Cao Chun. So he sends out Cao Chun and 5,000 cavalry only. That's the only force he sends out to chase Liu Bei down. And that is why Cao Cao was able to catch Liu Bei. That group of cavalry rode nonstop for a day and a night and caught up with Liu Bei's forces, which were completely unprepared. And Liu Bei did not expect it at all. And when that happened, the first thing Liu Bei did was try to kind of resist, but there was no way he could organize his army and the civilians to where he could hold back against Cao Chun's cavalry. So his force was shattered right away. And what they could do is Liu Bei just ran. Liu Bei ran with Zhuge Liang, with Zhang Fei, with Zhao Yun, and whoever the officers were, because they were at the head of the party that was leaving. His family was situated in the middle of the trail of their refugees, and they were immediately captured. Liu Bei lost 2 daughters in that fight. They're much older. He had no sons until Liu Chan. Liu Chan was maybe a month old at the time, and he was with Lady Gan. Lady Mi was really not part of the historical records, so we don't really know about what happened to her. But basically, all of Liu Bei's family were captured right away. And Xu Shu's mom was captured in that fight as well, all by Cao Chun. And as Liu Bei was escaping, Zhao Yun, who realizes that Liu Bei's family is stuck with the refugees, rode away by himself. He didn't ask permission to do this because I think, one, he recognized the importance that Liu Bei's heir is saved, because without a male heir, the line of succession becomes really tricky. So he wants to go back and do that. And also he wants to make a name for himself. You have to remember that Zhao Yun wasn't with Liu Bei the longest. So Zhao Yun's official role at the time wasn't a big general or anything. He was just the captain of the cavalry. And if you look at how poor Liu Bei is in terms of military strength, he doesn't have that many cavalry. So Zhao Yun is in a very small role at this point. And he wanted to prove his loyalty, prove his usefulness. So he personally rode back to try to find Liu Bei's son. And many of the time did say, oh, Zhao Yun is running back to betray us, to join Cao Cao. He thinks it's without hope. And Zhao Yun was able to go back and fight Cao Chun's cavalry by himself, just basically charged in there looking for Liu Bei's son. And he successfully found not only Liu Bei's son, but also Lady Gan, Liu Bei's son's mom. And he got both of them out. So Zhao Yun was quite successful, quite brave. He didn't have to fight that many named generals though, because Cao Cao's forces weren't there yet. Cao Cao's force would have never caught up to Liu Bei's force because the army also marched quite slowly. You have infantry, you have military supplies, you have food, a lot of logistical issues that you need to solve marching an army down. But the cavalry hit them fast, hit them first, and Zhao Yun was able to fight his way through this elite unit to save not only Liu Bei's baby, but also his wife. So he was successful there. But he wasn't able to save Liu Bei's 2 daughters. Those 2 daughters were captured by Cao Chun, and they were taken back to the capital, where Cao Cao rewarded Cao Chun by giving him these 2 girls as wives. So Liu Bei's 2 daughters became Cao Chun's wife, and eventually died of old age. Not bad death, but they died as the wife of Cao Chun. Another thing is, we talked about Zhao Yun. Zhao Yun, super brave, super strong. Everything he did was real deal. Going back to save the Lord's little baby and wife and come back alive. All of that is true. What else is true is that Zhang Fei did stand at Changban Bridge, did scream out at Cao Cao's army, but I guess in this case it would be Cao Chun and the cavalry, and were able to project enough strength to prevent them from chasing them. So he did act as the rear guard and successfully yelled and scared the enemy away from not chasing. And he did destroy the bridge afterward, which kind of effectively prevented them from chasing. There was no story where Guan Yu and Zhuge Liang came to rescue them. Zhang Fei basically did that. So both Zhang Fei and Zhao Yun really, really did well in this fight. And eventually they made their way to escape to Liu Qi's forces. And now we're on to our next part of the lore series, where Liu Bei's forces will join Sun Quan and the two of them will plan out a battle against Cao Cao's mighty force in the Battle of ChiBi, and ultimately change how the story of the Three Kingdoms play out, how the Three Kingdoms form. So come back next week when we jumpstart that part of the lore series, and hope you guys enjoy this part. Thank all of you guys for watching, and see you next time. Bye!